Hi, this is the video for Daf Nun Daled, page 54 of Masechet Avodah Zarah for Daf Shevui. Our daf this week begins with a fascinating discussion about compulsion to commit idolatry, basically a case where somebody forces a Jew to bow down to an idol, and we do have a lot of stories about that in Jewish tradition. Those famous stories don't come up on this daf, but there are really two discussions here, one that appears elsewhere and we've seen elsewhere in this Masechet, and that's about whether a person must allow himself or herself to become martyred, to die rather than worship idols, and this famous distinction between whether it's in public or in private, which I should note is actually a dispute among the Amoraim. We're familiar with the position that in public one should rather choose martyrdom, but in private one may bow down to the idol. But there are opinions in this Gemara that hold that in all cases somebody is not to be held accountable for worshiping idols under duress, and that's a Amoraic dispute. But there's also a unique issue that comes up in this chapter, and that's the larger topic of the chapter is the status of things that were worshipped. So if a Jew worships an idol in a case where he shouldn't be allowed to worship that idol, does the thing that he's worshiping become prohibited, as would normally be the case with things that are worshipped? It's also tied into the larger discussion that we've seen pop up a couple times. Can somebody cause somebody else's belongings to become prohibited? So it's a little bit of a tricky, I'll admit, the Masao Matan, the give and take in this piece is a little bit tricky. But if you have any questions and I can help, please do ask on the Daf Shevui page. There's a short discussion, not so short, but a discussion about things that are generally cannot become prohibited, but exceptional cases. So one of those is the ground, or natural features that are part of the ground. Generally speaking, if one worships mountains or hills or rivers or streams or things like that, they don't become prohibited. But if they have been modified for the use of idolatry, such as caves and caverns built into the ground, then that area of the ground can become prohibited. In essence, I would say it becomes like an idolatrous shrine. When it comes to animals, simply bowing down to an animal that doesn't belong to one, to the person bowing down to it, does not cause it to become prohibited, as we saw in other conversations. But if one actually modifies or slaughters the animal, basically, for idolatry, even though that animal doesn't belong to the person who slaughtered it, the animal is now prohibited, and its hide or its meat couldn't be put to any use. So there's a distinction between just worshiping something, which is bowing down to it, offering something to it, but not really modifying it, versus actually modifying it or using it for something. Also, discussion of using the animal in exchange for something idolatrous. Does it take on the idolatrous nature of that which it's exchanged for? So if I trade my dog for an idol, does my dog become idolatrous? I just can't help laughing about my dog, who, he would probably like to think of himself as an idol in a sense, but he is far from an idol. Enough about my dog. And then the end of this daf, really the second half of this daf, begins with the Mishnah, a fascinating series of Agadot, which mostly consist of conversations between Greco-Roman philosophers and rabbis about the nature of Avodah Zarah. And I just want to sort of emphasize what these discussions really are. These are not live recordings of discussions that the sages had with actual Greco-Roman philosophers. Rabbis may have argued out about Avodah Zarah with Greco-Roman philosophers. They probably did on occasion, but it's doubtful that these particular conversations are actually those recordings of those conversations. What these are more of the way that the rabbis project their own thoughts, their own doubts, their own concerns, their own maybe even theologically problematic thoughts, and they project them onto Greco-Roman philosophers in a way for them to sort of safely explore their own concerns and their own, let's say, doubts about Jewish belief. Most of them, essentially, the question is, if idolatry has no power and we don't believe in the existence of other gods, then really what idolaters are engaging in is simple foolishness. And why should we worry about their foolishness? Why should things become prohibited just because they commit foolish acts with them? Why is God jealous of other gods if other gods don't even exist? If other people worship the sun, the moon, and the stars, and God hates idolatry, why doesn't God just destroy all of the idols in the world? I think in essence, we're sort of asking the question, why don't we see God acting in the world vis-a-vis idolatry? And if idolatry is powerless, so who really cares? Why should we take it seriously? These are deep questions really about the entire Masechet. There are deep theological questions. And I think you'll enjoy reading them. It's a little bit of a different nature than the halachic discussions we've had. And this will be the end of this section. The next section is going to go on to about 20 daf, on the topic of prohibited wine. So enjoy these last theological conversations. And next week we're going to move on to a very different type of topic.